Hello there, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the web development series in which you're going to learn how to build websites from scratch using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about selectors in CSS and what are the different kinds of selectors and how to use selectors. I think it would be a nice little exercise if we try to build an HTML web page and try to then style it using CSS and in the process learn about selectors. So the HTML page that we will create would be a very simple version of Reddit. Now, if you don't know what is Reddit, it is basically an online forum, social media forum, where people can post about whatever and other people can comment about whatever. We'll try to make a very, very basic version of that and then add CSS to it using selectors. Now, I've already created a folder called Simple Reddit, and I have also created an HTML file called index.html. I'm also running the live server so that I can see the changes that I make to my code files. And yeah, so let's get started. The first thing that you need to add is the skeleton. Obviously, you can add that by pressing exclamation key and then enter, and that creates a boilerplate code. I can rename this to Reddit and save that. And if we go back, refresh, it's working. I just wanted to see if the live server is working. Anyway, so I want my website to have 3 sections. The header section, which will obviously have the logo, 2 buttons for login and register, and probably a search area. And then I want another section where all the posts are shown. I'll probably just do 3 posts for now. And then finally, I want a footer section where I can just add any terms and conditions or copyright icons, copyright information. So those are the 3 parts that I want for my website. When you want to create HTML pages, it is important that you know the different kinds of sections that you want to add. That's how we usually break down HTML pages, so that it becomes easier for you to code section by section. There are different ways of doing this, but one way and one approach that I use is what I'm going to show right now. Now, there are different tags that we didn't look at before in HTML. I'll talk about them now. The first one is called header. It's nothing but a container for you, but it signifies the header of the website. So usually it's at the top of the website. So I'm going to use that to have the logo. We will add the source, and then we also need to have alternate description, which is, for example, logo in this case. And I think that's it for now. And then I said we need a form kind of for search. So a form, and then input type should be text. You can say the placeholder is search. And then a submit button with search text. So if you look at it, there is a space for logo where the logo is going to be displayed, and then a form with the input field and with the text field and a button. We need we need 2 more buttons, one for login and then one for, let's say, register. If I save that, you can see I have login and I've registered. It looks ugly right now, but we will fix that using CSS. For logo, we can go and search for Reddit logo. And I don't want to search in this one. I think let's take this one. So I'm going to copy image address and just paste it here because I don't want to download it and then link it. I can just use it directly from the internet. So now if we go, okay, the logo is too big, so we can adjust it for now from HTML itself. So there's a logo now, there's a search bar, and then you have two buttons for login and register. And that is the header of the website. Usually the header also has navigation, but we're not looking at that right now. So that is one section. The second section that I want is for displaying the different posts that the users make. There's another tag called section, tag or element called section that just represents different sections. So you can have 10,000 sections in your page, that's okay, but you'll always have only one header and one footer. So that is something to note. So you have a section, and this section is to display posts. And then finally, after the section, you will have footer, which will be used to display the footer. For footer, we can just add the information now because it's not that long. Section, the post section will take the longest time. So I can say that there's a paragraph here and I want to display a copy symbol. So copy 2024 and then have a hyperlink for Reddit. I don't want it to be linked anywhere, so I'll put hash for now, and then just say all rights reserved. Usually that is what you show in the footer of any website, and you can see that the footer is there. Now, just to have like a division between all of them, I can use horizontal rule after every section or after every element, just to have a separation between all of them. Okay, so we have the header, we have the footer. Now we have to do the posts. Now we have to finish the posts. So I want to display 3 posts, so I'll add division, which is usually used to contain everything in one tag. So this division is going to be used for post 1. I'll add another one. This is for the second post, so post 2, and finally this one will be post 3 with the div. Okay, now you have a division for each one of them. Now I need to show a few things for every post that needs to be displayed. The first thing would be an image, which is actually the profile image of the user. So the source, we will find that out later. Alternate would be profile picture. And then I don't know if we need the height, but let's look for profile, default profile picture. I think let's use this one. Copy image address. In production, you wouldn't be doing this. We're doing this just because we're going to run this locally. It's not going to be published, but usually every resource like image, media, whatever is available on the internet and you want to use it, you should make sure that you have the proper rights to use it, because sometimes it's not allowed to just download and use things. So that's the profile image. If we go back, it's too big. So for now, I'll just give it a height of 20 for now. Okay. So that's the image. And then you also want to display the username. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but literally every social networking website, if you click on a person's username, you'll be able to go to their profile. So in essence, that name, the username that is shown there is basically a link that takes you to their profile. So that's the same concept that I'm going to use here. So ahref, right now we don't want to go anywhere, but this will be the user name. If we go back, it's fine for now. Then you want to have the post title, which for now you can use h3, let's say, the post title, which is basically the title of the post, and then a paragraph to have the description of the post. So it looks something like this for now. And then I also want a section where I can have interactions with the post. So a few buttons, for instance, button for like, button for comment, and button for share. So if we go back, we have a few buttons like, comment, share. I think this is a good enough post. All I'm going to do now is copy all of the content and paste it in the next section. So then we get to have 3 posts. I don't like the fact that they are just merging into each other, like if you notice it here. So the best thing would be to have, let's say, a horizontal rule after each one of them, so that you can know that they are separate. And I think this makes more sense. So this is a blank, I wouldn't say blank, sorry. It's a plain web page where there is no styling, and it doesn't look that good, but it gives you an idea about the website and what is being displayed. Anyway, so now we will use CSS and the concept of selectors to give styling to this web page. So if we go back and add a new file called styles.css, make sure that you link it in the head section of your HTML page. So you're going to see a link rel style sheet, and href is styles.css. Now it's linked. Now let's go back and try to add some styling. The first thing that I did in the web page was to add a logo. And when I added the logo, I had to declare the height within the element, the tag, right? This is not the best way, because right now your website has just one web page. In realistic websites and the actual websites that are created, your logo is literally on every page. So if you want to add your logo in this way, you would have to copy this and put it on every page. And then later on, if you want to change the size or the height, you would have to go to each one of these places and then change it individually. We've spoken about this in the beginning of CSS introduction. This is the exact reason why we use CSS. So I will get rid of this for now. And if we go back, this is not how the website should look. So I'll give some styling to this logo. So if we go here, now to add styling, your first instinct would be to add the image tag and then provide the styling. So for instance, you would say image, and then height is 50 pixels. If we go back, the height is fine, but the problem is every image on this page will take the same styling. For instance, if I add a border here of 10 pixels solid black, you will notice that this styling is being applied to every single image. I don't want it to be applied to every single image. So what can we do to solve this issue? This is where selectors come into play. Now, all of these are selector. This is basically an element selector, correct? So that means you're writing an element and you're expecting this styling to be implemented to all the elements that are there in your HTML, all of these elements, like image element. Now, there's another kind of selector that can be used, which is called the ID selector. For ID selector, you have to create an ID, and we've seen IDs when we discussed forms in the HTML form video, I think. ID is a unique name for a single element. So I know in this web page for now, I will only have one image that will represent the logo. I don't have any other image that represents the logo, right? So I can give it an ID called logo. And if we go back, I can change this to hash logo. Hash represents for ID. So if it is an ID, you have to put hash and then the name of the ID. So if I save this and I go back, you will see now the styling only applies here, because the CSS goes and searches for this specific ID, which it knows an ID can only have one instance. For example, there's only one element that is going to have the ID attribute set to the name that you're looking for. So in this case, styling is only applied to the logo, which is amazing. Now we can get rid of the border and keep it like this. Now, I don't like the fact that there is no space between the buttons and the search and the logo. So I'm probably going to give it a margin bottom of, let's say, 20 pixels. If we go back, now there's a bit of spacing. I think 20 pixels is a lot, maybe 10 pixels. Yeah, I think 10 pixels is fine. So there's some spacing between the logo and the search form. Now I want to also add a spacing between the search form and the buttons. So what I can do is I can go back and see which element should I use for this kind of styling. I can probably use form, and I can say that add a margin of 10 pixels. So I would say form, because it's an element. This is why I didn't add the hash symbol, because I'm using the element form. So form, add a margin of let's say 10 pixels. So now there's some spacing. I think let's increase it to 15. I think this is good. So now there's some spacing between all of these, and that's because of the margin that we added. Now it would start making sense why it was important to learn the box model, to know how to put spacing between the elements. Okay, so now I also want some spacing between the lines, the horizontal rule that we added, the HR tag. I want some spacing above as well, because I can see there's no spacing above, also very little spacing below. So I can say for HR, add a margin top of 10 pixels and a margin bottom of, I think, let's say 12 pixels. I don't know if it's very much visible, but let's make it 20 pixels so it's actually visible. Yeah, so now there's some spacing above and below the horizontal lines, which is fine for now. Now let's look at the post itself. So if you notice, every post has a profile picture, which is too small right now. I want to get rid of those, the height that I added for each one of them, so that we can see how it actually looks without any height. And this is not what we want. Now, in this case, if you wanted to add some styling, you could go to one of the profile pictures and you can say ID profile pic, and then go ahead and add the CSS. But the problem would be, we need the same styling not just for one element, we need it for multiple elements. You don't just have one profile picture that needs that styling. You have multiple. So if you have 100 people using this website, you would have 100 profile images, and you would want to add the same styling to all of those 100 profile pictures. In this case, IDs don't work, because IDs only work when you only have one of a kind element that you want the styling to be applied to. In this case, when you have multiple elements that need the same styling, what we use instead is called class. So if you want multiple elements to use a styling, you would create a class for it. So in this case, I've called it profile pic. I would save that. And if we go back, we will add a styling for the class profile pic. And if it's a class, you put a dot. If it's an ID, you put hash. If it's a class, you put a dot. And then you say profile pic, which is the name of the class, and then you add your styling. So I want its height to be 20 pixels. Okay. And I want it to be round. So what we can do is maybe use border radius and give it 50%. And let's go back and see. I mean, you cannot see it too clearly. So let's add a border of 2 pixels, solid black. So you can see it's actually a circle. 50%, if you add a border radius of 50%, it basically creates a circle for this specific element. If you increase the size to, let's say, 30 pixels, you can see it a little more clearly, but for now I'll just stick to 20 pixels. Now I have the styling, correct? I have created the styling for a class called profile pic. All I have to do is I have to assign that class to all the other elements that I want to use. So I would just copy this and go to the next image, add it there, go to the next image and add it there. And you can see now all of them have the same style. So when you want to create a style that is going to be used by multiple elements, you would use a class. If it's going to be only used by one element, you would use an ID. So now we've looked at a few selectors. This one is considered element selector. This one is considered, sorry, this one is ID selector, my bad. This is ID selector. This is element selector. This is also element. You don't have to write it. I'm just making it a little bit obvious. And this one is called class selector. Now there's something called attribute selector as well. So for instance, we have this form here, correct? And it has an input of type text. What I can do is I can say, go to the input where the type is actually text, and then apply this property where the background color becomes red and the text color becomes white. If we go back, you can see the background color of this input is red and the text color is white. Okay, so this is known as attribute selector because type here, all of these are attributes, correct? So you're saying that so what you're doing is you're selecting an element based on the attribute that it has. So if you added another input element, but it didn't have text as the type, it had number as the type, for instance, it will not take the same styling because the type here is different to what is mentioned in CSS. So this is known as attribute selector. Attribute selector. Now let's change the way the post title looks. So for instance, instead of having it just black title like it is shown here, let's change its color, maybe add a little bit spacing between the text. So in order to do that, because we have multiple post titles, we need to create a class, obviously. So class post title. You don't have to start by just adding it here. For example, I can remove this for now and I can actually create it first in CSS. So it would be, because it's a class, it would be dot post title, give it a color of red, and letter spacing should be 2 pixels, let's say. And if I go back, I can just add it here as class post title. If we go back, you can see it's red and there's a bit of spacing when you compare it with the other post titles. And all you have to do is copy it and paste it along with the other post titles where it's needed. Now, because I've created it as post title, it doesn't just necessarily have to work there. For instance, if I accidentally add it here, it will still work. It will just make the text, like it will just take the styling for the mentioned class and apply it to the element. So that is it with the post title. There's one thing that I forgot to mention, but I mentioned it in the previous videos. There's also something called a universal selector. So universal selector, which is basically a star. And for instance, you can add a font family. Let's say this one. And all the text, like all the page, the whole page will take the same font because of the star selector. So what the star selector actually does, it says for every element on this page, it should have a font family of this font. And if you even declare a color, for instance, you say all the text should be red, all the text on your page will be red because of the star selector. So that's universal selector. Now, for instance, I want all of these buttons to be round buttons, not the square ones that they are, but rounded buttons. So how can I do that? One way would be that you go to every button and you add a class because you have multiple buttons. But the better way for this would be to use the parent-child relationship. If you remember, if there's an element and it has another element within it, it forms a parent-child relationship. For instance, this division is the parent for image, anchor, h3, paragraph, and all the 3 buttons. And all of these elements are the children or the child elements for the division element. So I can use this relationship to kind of figure out a way to create these buttons as rounded buttons. All I have to say is, if there's a div and it has button in it as a child, so div space button, that means div is the parent, button is the child. Then in that case, set the border radius to be 10 pixels. And let's also change the background color. Make the background color black. If we go back, you can see that it has changed it for every single one of them. So for every single post, it has changed the background color to black, and it has made the button to be a rounded button. And we can even change the color to white because right now it is black, which is why you cannot see the text. And now you can see the text. You can even add some padding if you want. So padding of 15 pixels for each one of them. And there's some spacing. I think that's too much. Maybe 10. I think that's fine. So each one of them are now rounded buttons. Now if I go back, if by mistake you've forgot to write the child, this is what will happen. It will take the style for the parent, which is the division, which is what we don't want. So always make sure when you add a parent-child relationship, you have to specify the parent and then the child that the styling is going to be applied on. So in this case, all of this styling is being applied on the buttons which are within the division. So it will go and look for a division. This division has buttons, so it will add the stylings on these 3 buttons. Now, there's one more thing which is called pseudo class, which is basically different states of any element. So for instance, right now the buttons are black, correct? But when I hover over these buttons, I want their background color to change, and I want their text color also to change. That hover is known as pseudo class. So for instance, I can say for every division which has a button, in its hover state, this is how we write pseudo class, colon, and then this state. In this case, I want to code for the hover state. So when you hover it, the background color should be, let's say, aquamarine, and the text color should be black. So if we go back, if you hover over any of them, the background color and the text color change. So that is how we can use the pseudo class to represent different states. But you will notice it doesn't happen here because these are not in division. This is a header, right? So it's not happening in this case. So now there's another one. I can show you another state, which is, for example, the active state. In this case, I want the background color to be, let's say, blue violet, and the color to be black. And if you go back and if you click on it, only then the purple or the violet color shows up. So active is when you click on it. Hover is when you just move the cursor over it. And there are many other pseudo classes that you can code for. So I think it would be the best thing to do would be go to MDN and search for pseudo class, and you will get a lot of information about the pseudo classes. So there is hover, there's focus, there's active, there is required, enabled. All of these, they work the same way. Basically, you add the colon and you use the pseudo class that you want to use. So one thing to remember now is when you add some CSS in a parent, for example, let's say I want to add some styling for section. So I would give it an ID, for instance, post, because you can have multiple sections. Right now we just have one, but you can have multiple sections. So I've given it an ID post. If I just say post background color to be, let's say, black, you will notice the whole thing takes the black color. You will notice that the whole thing has taken the background color as black. What this really means is every element, the image, the anchor tag, the post title, the post text, all of them have taken a black background. This is known as inheritance, which means whatever properties are given to the parent will eventually be given to the child elements as well. There are some exceptions there, but usually that's how it works. So for example, right now, let's make it beige, and you can see all of them, all of the sections are now beige. You can even add, like, I can see there is some merge happening here. So what I can say is please add some padding of 20 pixels. And now you can see there is some spacing between the sides and the text. So I think that's about it for selectors. You can even change these buttons if you want to, try it further. But this is what we want to discuss as the basics of selectors. You should know about universal selector, ID selector, element selector, class selector, attribute selector, and then parent-child selector, basically. There is something called sibling selector, but we don't really use it as much. You can read about it if you want, but these are the basic ones that we generally use. In this case, I've also spoken about the pseudo class, where you can code for different states of an element. And I think that's about it. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comment section below. And in the next video, we will talk about the units and the sizings that we use in CSS. So until then, happy learning and see you in the next one.